He's now in his 15th season at Worcester Warriors, playing full-time professional rugby. He was capped for England in 2014 against New Zealand. And diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, age 19, and has been managing this with a very low carbohydrate diet for the last few years. Every conference needs an expert, and Chris Pennell is today's patient expert.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Gail, for stealing my introduction. So obviously, Gail has said briefly who I am. That is me with a bit more hair back in 2014. I've been fortunate enough to play professional rugby now for 14 and a half years. I still kind of feel like I need to grow up and go to university, but I kept putting it off. So back in 2007, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. No history of it in my family, but I guess a lot of things made sense at the time, as it does with a lot of diagnosis. So it was during pre-season training. I'd got home. I was still at home at the time. I'd eaten enough food for about 3 people. I think I'd guzzled down 4 or 5 pints of water, and then I'd gone and passed out in the garden. And my mum was concerned, but then I guess the symptoms are all kind of masked because I was training really hard, so of course I was going to be tired, and of course I was going to be hungry, of course I was going to be thirsty. The thing, I guess, that wasn't adding up was the fact that I left school weighing about 80 kilos, and I'd gone through a year of professional training, and that weight hadn't shifted at all. So there was something going on. We had a routine pre-season blood test, which came back showing extremely high blood glucose. It was then confirmed the following day just with a simple finger prick test that indeed I was type 1 diabetic. I was extremely lucky to be in the environment I was in. I had a fantastic medical team around me. I had access to experts in the field in performance with diabetes. And so I kind of went off skipping and dancing down that path, which I guess was a more kind of conventional diet for sport performance, which of course involves an awful lot of carbohydrate. The issues I was having, which I think a lot of diabetics do, is my management was basically chasing hypos with food and hypers with insulin, and it was just kind of riding that roller coaster on a daily basis and trying my best to perform in the gym or on the training pitch or even on the pitch. I really struggled with high blood glucose for matches in particular, because when you chuck in the adrenaline and the situation that you're in front of 15,000 people screaming and shouting and the pressures of the game, obviously going into a game having had a decent amount of carbohydrate already, and then suddenly coming in at half time and my blood glucose being up around sort of 18, 19, it was quite worrying. I also noticed that I was it was taking me a long time to get over games. We were testing things like CK levels in blood, and I was always consistently much higher than every other athlete at the time. Then there was a huge development, which Joanne mentioned earlier, that sort of changed my whole outlook on things, and that was the introduction of continuous blood glucose monitoring. And as soon as I got hooked up to the CGM, my life changed really. My HbA1cs have always been very good, and I think, as I say, the situation I was in, playing rugby, the amount of exercise I was doing, my general health being good, my HbA1cs have always been in a really good range. So I would use the traditional finger prick technique. I would go to bed, in particular where the CGM helped me. I'd go to bed, test my blood, wake up in the morning, and I'd be at a level that I thought was great. I thought I had it nailed. I was cruising through the night around this sort of 5.1, 4.7, whatever it may be. As soon as I got hooked up to CGM, it turned out I was dropping in and out of hypos sort of 2 or 3 times every evening, every night. Wasn't always waking up, and more often than not I'd wake up feeling pretty exhausted the next day, having felt like I'd had a good night's sleep. And things kind of made sense. Obviously my body was working extremely hard at night time, trying to recover from the training day, from the load, and then dealing with hypoglycemia in the middle of the night obviously didn't help. So CGM allowed me to make some really positive, proactive change to my management. What it also did was it gave me the confidence overall to make a shift in what I guess was you were taught traditionally to do as a diabetic and also as an athlete. And then I was introduced to the low carb keto lifestyle about 2.5 years ago through a colleague of mine at the rugby club. He listened to a podcast, Joe Rogan podcast with a guest, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, based over in the US. I see a lot of people nodding. And where that kind of caught my interest was obviously a very credible source, works with NASA, with the US Special Forces. He himself is an athlete as well and had been following the ketogenic diet, our diet for a number of years, maintaining his athletic performance. But my friend mentioned that someone in Dominic's study group was type 1 diabetic and had switched over to a low carb or keto diet, and the benefits had been huge on their management. So I was at a stage of my career, of my life, where I thought, screw it, why not? I'll have a look, do some research. If it doesn't work, I can always go back. So I started looking into things online, listening to podcasts. I got a book by Ellen Davis, which was the ketogenic diet for type 1 diabetes, which I found very insightful, very useful to begin with. And me being me, I kind of just dived in head first. And to be honest with you, I rushed in. And I went from a traditional high carbohydrate diet around sport to cutting everything out. And it definitely affected my performance. I lost probably about 5-6 kilos of lean muscle. My speed was down, my strength was down. But hooked up to the CGM, the one thing that I saw was that my blood glucose stayed stable throughout the day, regardless as to what I was doing on this low carb diet. So from that side of things, and the relief I kind of felt there, I thought, right, this is worth sticking at it. It's worth looking into it a bit further. So I started looking for some expert help more locally. We're very fortunate at the rugby club. We have a nutritionist who's full-time. He's a young guy, one of the most highly regarded in his field, and he flat told me, don't do it. You need carbohydrates to perform in sport, especially repeat high intensity sport. There's no evidence to suggest otherwise. Don't do it, but at the end of the day, it's your career. So I was like, I'm doing it. So I found someone else locally, a wonderful lady named Lynn Adams, who she's a nutritional therapist, and she was fantastic. She guided me through things early on. She'd worked with sports people before, she'd worked with diabetics before, but never a diabetic sports person. So I kind of piqued her interest, and we came up with a program that works for me. And I think, as Joanne mentioned earlier, it works for me because it's individualised, and you can't obviously tarnish everyone with the same brush. But I'm just going to move on quickly before I get on to the real positives that I've had with this change. I just want to talk about some of the drawbacks that I'm sure a lot of people here will be familiar with. So I've got a young family. I've got a 6-year-old daughter, 3-year-old son, a Scottish wife who's very stubborn and loves a biscuit. So family life was a real struggle at first, and especially because I think I probably, if I'm honest with myself, turned into a bit of a martyr and was kind of on my high horse a little bit too much and dictating what we should and shouldn't be doing. My excuse is that I was just very excited because I felt like I found something that would work for all of us. It would be great for long-term health, great for the kids' development, and like I did initially, I think, with the low-carb diet, I dived in head first instead of maybe easing in and having a few more gentle conversations. So yeah, there were a few heated discussions, shall we say, and then I love cooking, which I think has helped me massively with this. I kind of get my switch off when I'm in the kitchen, and what I started to do was not really tell them what I was making. So like if I was making a pizza, for example, I'd find a keto recipe, I'd look at a low carb pizza dough, and just serve it and just say nothing, and then they'd eat it, they'd enjoy it. And then obviously I'd drop the bombshell and say, you do realise that was very low carb, and the kids love it. My wife didn't love it quite so much once I'd said that, but I guess the point is there are things that you can change gradually over time, and you don't miss these things that a lot of people say, oh, I just couldn't live without X. Well, you can quite easily, but it takes time and it takes a bit of commitment. The other, as I mentioned earlier, the other issues that I had initially were this rapid weight loss, the loss in strength, the loss in speed. It gradually came back over a period of time once I got into the swing of things, once I found the things that worked for me. But sort of initially, I guess, it was a big shock, and had it not been for the CGM backing up what my blood glucose was doing, I'm not convinced that I would have stuck at it, because rugby's a very short career. I only had a couple of years left in me at that stage, the way I was feeling. So it was quite a big decision. The other things that I've noticed is I went through a good honeymoon period when it came to my insulin requirements. I went from injecting probably between 18 to 24 units of background insulin, Lantus, on a daily basis, and roughly between 6 and 15 units of fast-acting Humalog daily. That was prior to going low carb, and I went from that to about 6 units of Lantus and no need for Humalog throughout the day, which is obviously a huge decrease. That has gradually crept up. I'm still not back to the same levels that I was, so on a daily basis now I'm injecting between 10 and 14 units of Lantus, and it tends to be depending on my training. There's certain things that I do, matches for example, I need to inject fast acting to maintain a good level of blood glucose, but generally overall my medication requirements have certainly decreased significantly. On to the positives. So as a diabetic, I feel like I've got a bit of control back. I feel like, the stats show when I look at my CGM, my blood glucose is maintained at a really nice level. My HbA1cs are starting to creep down, not significantly, but they're going down. And like I say, the difference now is that my HbA1c prior to low carb, I was always between sort of 5.3, 5.6, which is obviously great, but kind of cheating a little bit. As I say, I was going in and out of hypo all the time, not necessarily a safe way to do it. Whereas now I'm achieving around the 5.1, but I know that my blood glucose is maintained at that nice constant level. As I mentioned, I love cooking, so I've suddenly been exposed to a whole new world of recipes and things to try, which for my own mental well-being has been great. I feel like my ability to take on stress, to cope with various challenges in life, things like bringing up a young family, the stresses of professional rugby, the stresses of trying to figure out what I'm going to do after rugby, that kind of stuff. I feel like I've got a lot more capability to deal with that, whether that's diet related or just because I'm getting older and wiser, I don't know, but I do think it certainly has a mental impact. My education, I feel like I knew nothing really around sport performance and around diet prior to going on this journey a couple of years ago, and I feel really, really pleased that I feel confident I can pass this information on to my kids, and it's something I know had my mum, who was diagnosed pre-diabetic last year and is now in the clear from following a low carb diet. I know she would have wanted to have passed on to me had she known what a lot of us know now. I guess my performances on the pitch as well, which is obviously very important. I'd probably say I had my best season of my life last season. And as I say, there's probably a bit of age and stage in that mix, but that was all without carbohydrate. And as I say, in the world of rugby, it is a very carbohydrate-based sport. And to be able to perform on the pitch, statistically to have more involvements every game, to have more positive involvements every game, scored more tries last year than I ever had before. Without a doubt, I feel that is related to my lifestyle change. The biggest impact it has had, without a doubt, is just how I feel, how my body feels. I've been unlucky in my career through injury, certainly early on, I think, when I was getting to grips with the diabetes and everything. My left knee, I've had 2 ACL reconstructions, I've had meniscus tears, all kinds of issues. And going back 2 years before I started this, I would not have thought I'd still be playing rugby at this age, albeit 32, but in rugby that's pretty ancient. And let me tell you, I do feel it when you look in the matchday program and there's kids that are born 2002. It's terrifying. But the point is, I wake up on a Sunday morning after a match, after 80 minutes of Premiership rugby, and I bounce out of bed. I don't have aches and pains. I had chronic pain in my knee previously. That has all but gone. My general recovery in matches is definitely improved. Statistically, my fitness has improved. My speed is maintained from when I was 25, which not many 32-year-olds, I guess, could say. Just the general inflammation on my body and allowing me to optimise my training on a daily basis, to be in a really good place come a game day on a Saturday. That's been the biggest impact. And what it basically allowed me to do was, as I said, I had my best season I've ever had last year, and it earned me another contract. It earned me another 2 years of playing professional rugby at the top level, doing what I love to do. And the only change I made was that diet change. So it's allowed me to continue, I guess, chasing my dream and being in the fortunate position that I am to basically run around and chuck a ball about with my mates in front of a load of people, which is great fun. And I guess just bringing it back to from a diabetic perspective, I love Joanne, your comment about basically diabetics are carbohydrate intolerant, and it completely makes sense. And I guess whenever I speak to diabetics, I sort of try and push across that for me it's better to have eaten too few carbohydrates than to have injected too much insulin, because I can control that so much easier. If I'm drifting into a hypo, I can control that, whereas if I'm plummeting in, that's when the issues start. So it's made a huge impact on my life, and I'd love to take any questions if anyone has any.
Wow, that was amazing. Love that story. Mark.
Hi Chris. What happened to your club nutritionist? Did he change his opinion?
So no, he hasn't changed his approach, and I do kind of when I go into the food room and back on. Hello, there we go. Yeah, I do kind of wince every now and again when I go into the food room and I see what the guys are getting fed for a snack before a session or before a big meeting. And it's no wonder you get guys kind of falling asleep in the meeting rooms. So I guess the one thing that he has conceded is that it absolutely has worked for me. But then there is a bit of a stigma, I think, attached to it. And a lot of the guys that ask me questions, a lot of the other rugby players, assume that I'm doing this because I'm diabetic, as opposed to the sports benefits as well. The benefits for me as a diabetic are huge, but I do feel, as I mentioned before, the sports performance side of it without a doubt, it's had a huge impact. And interestingly, we are getting players more educated through their own research. There's 3 or 4 guys that like to do intermittent fasting. They like to train in a fasted state. I actually trained this morning in a fasted state and felt great. So guys are starting to clue into it more, but the stigma very much still remains that for a high collision, high impact, high repeat, high intensity sport, you need to have carbohydrate as your main energy source, which we've had discussions about at the rugby club, and obviously I disagree with as things stand, but we're slowly having conversations, and I think that's all you can have. You can't be too aggressive with these things. I've sent him a few papers and stuff, but
one more question here.
Hi Chris, thank you. That was fascinating. And my question's about the kind of hydration side of things, the energy side of things. So I imagine that at half time your colleagues are refueling with carbohydrate-rich drinks. What are you doing? How do you work that side of things?
Sure. Well, initially, one of the issues that I had when I first kind of dived in was I wasn't drinking enough water for a start. That was one of the real issues I had. I wasn't replenishing the salts I was losing. It was those kind of small details of the education side of things that I wasn't aware of. So my pre-match, my half-time ritual, I guess, is that I'm getting a decent amount of fluids on board. I'm getting salts on board as well. Viridian do a nice salts. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it comes in a little green bottle. Splash a few drops of that in, and I find that really helps. Even just using things like rock salt, I'll grind some rock salt into my shakes before training, or during my breaks after training. Just replenishing the salts, I find, is the main thing, and I'm always in quite good habits. Tend to always have a water bottle on me, just sipping away throughout the day as well.
One more at the back. Can we combine these questions? Go on.
Hi, can I just ask, what do you have before your games when you don't have the carbs?
So I don't really change much, to be honest, and if anything, I'll have sort of less food. A lot of guys will obviously be piling in the pasta and piling in the carbs. So I tend to have a pretty light salad with maybe some chicken or some form of carbohydrate, some form of protein. A decent glug of extra virgin olive oil, plenty of salt and pepper, and that kind of sees me through. Or if I'm at home and I'm prepping for a game, I might make some pancakes. Great recipe I've got with loads of coconut oil, bit of coconut flour, a little bit of green and blacks, cocoa powder. It makes a really nice pancake. So I'll have maybe something like that, but not too much. I tend to like to have less of a full stomach going into matches.
Thank you so much. That was really good.